I've been saying for a while that Zen 4 would be better than people thought, and earlier this week AMD more than delivered, announcing the new very impressive Zen 4 chips, their respective prices, along with some other important information like the longevity of the AM5 platform. There were several things that I think went under the radar, so let's take a deep dive into the AMD Zen 4 presentation. I've done a bunch of videos in recent times talking about how AMD are building a synergistic ecosystem that will give you some advantages if you choose an AMD CPU and discrete GPU. The AMD Advantage program was implicitly on display in AMD's presentation, with AMD's own testing using a 6950 XT GPU for benchmarks versus their competitors, with things like SAM, the new Expo overclocking profiles, and direct access memory all turned on. You can bet that if AMD had mixed components, like using an Nvidia GPU for the CPU comparisons, the Zen 4 chips wouldn't have looked as impressive. And you know what? I think it took AMD too long to realize how much of an advantage they have. At the end of the day, AMD's primary concern is making sure their products stand out and that there's a compelling reason to buy everything they sell, and creating a whole platform that takes advantage of the several businesses they are involved in makes perfect sense. I only expect this to have a greater emphasis going forward. Before we look at the CPUs, which are nothing short of incredible, let me just quickly go over one of the greatest disappointments of the presentation, the RDNA 3 showing, or the lack of it to be precise. No better way to tout that platform advantage than with a demo of direct storage, showing a game like Forsaken loading much faster on the 7950X, along with a 7900 XT RDNA 3 GPU and a Gen 5 M.2 drive. That would have sold a lot of people on the AMD Advantage. Instead, they showed the upcoming game Lies of P with no context or any info at all, saying just that RDNA 3 is running in their labs and that its performance looks absolutely wonderful, and that RDNA 3 will launch later this year. This could be interpreted as a lack of confidence in their upcoming GPUs, as obviously a lot of people considering purchasing a Zen 4 chip will also be looking at next-gen GPUs, so this would be a good opportunity to show them both together with a frame rate counter or something. Is there a reason to buy an AMD GPU instead of an Nvidia one if I buy a Zen 4 CPU? AMD didn't say, and I think that's a missed opportunity, and one could interpret this as meaning that the RDNA 3 GPUs are nowhere ready to be launched. Another possible interpretation is that AMD is hiding their cards here as much as possible so as not to give Nvidia any hints at what their strategy is. I'm going to give AMD the benefit of the doubt here, as sandbagging is what they've done with these Zen 4 CPUs in the last couple of months, and that strategy seems to be working. We did get to see a tease of the new reference design Shrouds, which looks similar to the 6000 series, but with some key differences. Instead of the X detail in the center of the card on the 6950 XT, there seems to be this sort of angular arc shape that lights up, and that same shape is repeated above in the plastic encasing. There are 3 fins on the fin stack that are painted red, which is a cool detail, I guess. AMD obfuscated the power connectors for obvious reasons, but you can tell that there are 2 8-pin connectors there. The card also seems to be curved on the right side, at least on this render, but it's hard to tell for sure. The encasing around the fin array does seem to be thinner than on the 6000 series. I did find another render, which seems to be of a lower tier GPU, perhaps the 7800 XT. On this one, there doesn't seem to be that angular arc that lights up. The Radeon logo seems recessed and facing upwards rather than in an angle. I mean, these are just renders and could be different from the final product, but I thought it was an interesting tease nonetheless. Also note that in both cases the center of the fans has changed. It's no longer a circle with the Radeon R logo printed on it, but it looks like there's some sort of different shape there now, perhaps a new logo. From this tease, the cards look premium like with the previous gen and should look great in a build. Long gone are the days of mediocre blower fan designs. One thing to note on GPU performance is that from what we're seeing with Zen 4, like how efficient and how high it is clocking, one can imagine that the many TSMC 5 and node improvements will also translate into the GPU products. Rumors of the upcoming GPUs clocking over 3 GHz don't seem so crazy now. Moving on to the CPUs, it's nothing short of incredible what AMD has done with Zen 4, and I think most people don't realize how good these will be. These are all AMD's claims which need to be verified independently, of course. But to be fair, from my own experience with working with AMD, their marketing claims regarding things like efficiency and performance have been accurate in the past and validated in my own benchmarks when products are sampled. I expect that to be the case here also. AMD is claiming a 13% IPC uplift compared to last gen, when just a couple months back they had said it would be roughly 8%. The max frequency is a whopping 5.7 GHz, when they had said it would be 5.5 GHz plus. The single core performance gain is therefore 29%, instead of the greater than 15% AMD teased a couple months back. This means AMD has over-delivered and then some. These are not just impressive numbers. These come at a time when it's getting harder and harder to squeeze performance out of new nodes without massive penalties to efficiency. So I want you to take a look at this slide. With 50% less area size than the Alder Lake Golden Cove core, AMD is getting more single-core performance and up to 47% better energy efficiency. Assuming these claims are true, this is just staggering, and Intel really have their work cut out for them with the upcoming Raptor Lake SoCs. More on that later. Now, apparently there's an unreleased document going around, a Zen 4 software optimization guide, which includes some more details on the Zen 4 core than were publicly revealed. Retired Engineer on Twitter has shared a table, and we can see here an increase to 1 MB of L2 cache per core and a respective increase in latency. But note that this is a very marginal latency increase considering how much cache there is. In workloads that benefit from large L2 caches, this will have a very positive impact. Intel's Alder Lake has 1.25 megs per core of L2, but the chips top out at 8 big cores. The L3 cache in Zen 4 remains the same, but it's not shared like in Alder Lake. You get 4 MB per core. That means you won't get a performance penalty when all cores are enabled in gaming workloads, something that can happen with Alder Lake. Now remember, L2 cache costs die area, yet AMD's core die area is 50% smaller than Alder Lake's big core. Also, this amount of cache per core generally comes with a massive performance per watt penalty, but somehow AMD is claiming an insane 62% lower power at the same performance level as Zen 3 and 47% better efficiency than Alder Lake. These numbers are just incredible and a testament to how good TSMC's 5N node is. Again, this should give you some indication of how good some other upcoming products on the same node will be. Do note that all this doesn't come for free, and cooling such a densely packed core with transistor switching this fast is not going to be easy. Add to that AVX 512, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some thermal throttling happening when the whole SoC is working hard. I don't know if the Zen 4 products will come with a box cooler, but I think those will be mostly useless. Much like with Intel, I expect purchasing a third-party cooler will be necessary to get the most out of Zen 4. Now you would think that going from 12 cycles in Zen 3 to 14 cycles in L2 latency in Zen 4 would result in a performance penalty. And yes, that will be the case, except when the workload fits into L2, where the benefits are enormous. So there's some give and take here. If you don't have to fetch from L3, then the latency improvement is huge. But it remains to be seen what happens when that's not the case. I think gaming is the key workload here, and we'll look at that next. But nevertheless, this is a far greater improvement gen to gen than Zen 3 was from Zen 2. Although we are changing nodes this time around, so that was always going to be the case. Looking at the CPU's claimed gaming performance, I will reserve judgment for the actual reviews, and you should too. Everything that was shown is pretty much irrelevant until there are independent, trustworthy reviews, and you can expect Cortex to have a review on launch day, but I think we can safely assume that if gaming is the only thing you care about, then you should probably wait for the X3D variants of Zen 4. While some of the results here are impressive, especially Tomb Raider, as that uses CPU resources pretty well, the footnotes show that AMD used 3600 C16 RAM on the Zen 3 system and 6000 C30 RAM on the Zen 4 system, but with the overclocking profile on. So some of this improvement might come from just the differences in the RAM kits chosen. We don't know how good Expo is, but if you've turned on XMP in your system, you know that there's a performance improvement. Even if this is the best case scenario, to me this looks like parity with Alder Lake, except Alder Lake will have better 1% lows. I'm currently testing the 12900K, 12700 and 12600K for an upcoming video, and I can tell you way that these numbers that AMD are showing are similar to what you'd get with Alder Lake with some good DDR4 die RAM. What this means is that, assuming AMD's numbers are accurate, in single-player games at 1440p or above, I doubt there will be any tangible difference between Zen 4, Alder Lake, and Raptor Lake. But in online competitive games, I expect the Intel chips to come out ahead. Again, wait for independent benchmarks and ones that actually test this, not just out-of-the-box performance. There was a 12900K comparison, but AMD took the CSGO result out of that one and replaced it with GTA 5, so we can assume that the 7950X loses to the 12900K in CSGO. We see that Tomb Raider went from an increase of 35% versus the 5950X to 14% versus the 12900K, and that confirms what we saw earlier, that games that utilize resources better will likely see greater benefits with Zen 4. I think that's pretty obvious, but unfortunately we don't see many of those games being made. We see that there's a loss to GTA 5, although 1% is really within margin of error, and GTA 5 is not what I would consider a good benchmarking tool. Kudos to AMD for showing wins here as well as a tie and a technical loss. They could have just shown results in games where AMD wins. Knowing their marketing, I think this means that these results are representative of what we can expect. A few wins and a few narrow losses or ties with Alder Lake, but of course an absolute beating in anything rendering related like Blender or Cinebench multi-thread. There is something you should consider. If AMD sandbagged up to this point, who's to say that they're not saving the better results for actual reviews? They know reviewers will test these claims. If AMD are consistent with this strategy, then perhaps Zen 4 will be faster than Alder Lake in more titles than not. Who knows really, this is all speculation, and all we have are these numbers. So why do I think that if gaming is all you care about, that you should wait for the X3D parts? Well, Raptor Lake is up in the air, but I would be surprised if the performance was much higher than on Alder Lake. But for Zen 4D, you can be sure that gaming will greatly benefit from the added 3D cache. I think those chips will be absolute beasts. They will also be very expensive. I see Zen 4 as basically closing the gap to Intel in the few workloads where they were losing, like gaming, but being even better at the things they were winning at with Zen 3, like multi-core performance. So they are great all-rounders, but not necessarily the best you can get if gaming is your main focus. I would wager that even the 5800X3D will be better at gaming than the 7950X. That's something I'm definitely going to test for the reviews. One CPU in particular that I think is really misunderstood is the 7600X. Again, wait for independent reviews, but going by AMD's own numbers, we see that the 7600X is either on par with the 12900K at 1080p high, or even a bit faster. Looking at the footnotes of this comparison, we see that both chips were tested with AMD's 6950XT GPU with SAM on and rebar on their respective platforms. We know that the 6950XT will gain about 10% extra performance with SAM on in the current gen CPUs, so it's safe to assume that that will be the case with AM5 as well, which means that if AMD had used an Nvidia 3090 Ti, the 7600X and the 12900K would be more evenly matched. The memory used was DDR5 6000, which means you could use faster RAM on the Alder Lake system and get a bit more performance there. But I don't think these details matter that much, because even if the 7600X is say 5 to 10% slower than the 12900K in less favorable conditions, it costs $299, while the 12900K is currently between $530 and $570, depending on which variant you get. Now you can argue that maybe with Raptor Lake, you can get something like an i5 13600, which should cost about the same as the 5600X or less, and perform better, seeing as it's Raptor Lake, presumably giving us a performance uplift in games. But you'd be wrong. The i5 13600 will actually be a repurposed Alder Lake chip with all the E-cores enabled. Only the top Raptor Lake SKUs will actually be a new core design. So to me, the 7600X is properly priced and actually pretty good value. Obviously, I would prefer if it were cheaper, but it's a premium CPU on a new platform, and the 600X variants of Zen have traditionally been the most popular, so I can see why AMD is pricing it as is. You are getting a step up to a 12900K for $300 on a new platform that will probably last you 3 to 5 generations worth of upgrades. I could be wrong, and maybe there's more to the mid-range Raptor Lake chips than what the leaks suggest, but as things stand, I think the 7600X, contrary to what most people are saying, is actually priced fairly for what it's offering. Also, the 7600X will be a kick-ass CPU for emulation, considering it supports AVX512. I'm not super impressed with the 7900X at $550, whereas in the previous generation it was priced so far away from the 5950X that it made sense. It's now in a strange place where it's too close to the 7950X for it to make sense as a workstation CPU, and it's not going to be much faster at gaming than the 8-core 7700X, which has a much lower TDP and is $150 less. That's the price of a good AIO cooler. The 7700X also isn't that appealing to me, knowing that there will be X3D variants coming out early next year, possibly as early as January. The 7950X really is the star product here, and until the X3D variant of this CPU comes out, this will be the best CPU in the world at pretty much everything except competitive shooters. And I'm honestly positively surprised that AMD's charging $100 less for this at launch than the 5950X launch price. Of course, one thing to remember is that MSRPs are one thing and the prices of these at retail will be another. You can expect to pay a huge premium on them at launch, and if Intel doesn't deliver, then I can totally see retailers keeping these there quite a bit higher than MSRP while demand is high. And demand will be high if I know anything about PC enthusiasts. Note that B650 Non-E supports full overclocking of both memory and CPU, and while on Alder Lake, because of things like the PL1 and PL2 restrictions, budget motherboards are not something you should use with something like a 12900K. With these Zen 4 chips, I can totally see a B650 Extreme board being a fine pairing with a 7950X. Not that I would do that, but what I mean is that when you take into account the price of the motherboard and its longevity, the prices of these Zen 4 chips will be offset to some extent, while that won't be the case with Alder Lake and Raptor Lake, particularly the latter, which is a dead end as far as an investment for the future is concerned. Intel really needs to increase their motherboard support to 4 generations instead of 2. Another thing worth noting, and I did say as much during the live stream coverage of the event at the Techonomics podcast, which you should subscribe to if you haven't, is that if AMD's efficiency claims at low wattage are true, then the upcoming APU's Dragon Range and Phoenix Point will be a huge threat to Intel's dominance in the mobile market. Note that what AMD isn't showing us is the efficiency gains at 15 watts, 35 watts, and 45 watts. If this trend extrapolates to those voltages, then the gains could just be absurd compared to last gen. With this sort of efficiency, AMD can offer 16 cores on mobile, along with RDNA 3 graphics, and still have really good battery life. I think the most impressive thing about this Zen 4 announcement is what it could mean for mobile and portable PCs and the rise of the APU. I could see a device like the Steam Deck with performance similar to a last-gen desktop CPU, but with updated RDNA 3 graphics being incredibly enticing, something you can carry around with you and dock at home plugged into a monitor without compromising on high performance. That's the dream, and a dream that could become reality if these efficiency claims hold up. Like I said earlier, also worthy of mention is the fact that Zen 4's support of AVX512 does matter for gamers, at least those who like emulation. The Dolphin Nintendo emulator sees a 32% improvement at ISO frequencies. The PS3 emulator RPCS3 sees an improvement of over 30% when using AVX512. And the final corner case where I think Zen 4 will excel at, particularly the 7950X, is in audio production. Having display output on a 16-core, 32-thread CPU of this caliber without the need for a noisy discrete GPU is awesome. Those building workstations for audio engineering or music production can undervolt the 7950X, slap a passive cooler on it, and not have to endure having a loud GPU affecting their workflow just to display a picture. So to conclude, I'm honestly surprised by the cold reaction that a lot of people had to the Zen 4 announcement. I don't know if it's because everyone knows that the Zen 4 X3D is coming soon, or if CPUs just got boring, but I for one can't wait to test these out. I've recently changed my main rig from a 7950X to a 12900K system, and I've been really enjoying the Intel system. It feels really snappy compared to the Zen 3 flagship, and I'll have a video with my experience with Alder Lake in a few days here on the channel. But Zen 4 might just make me move back to AMD. As a content creator, you can imagine how tempting the 7950X looks to me. AMD has thrown it out of the park with Zen 4, and they should be congratulated for pushing the envelope. Intel won't sit still though, and maybe Raptor Lake can positively surprise us in the same way that Zen 4 did. Whatever the case may be, between Zen 3, Alder Lake, Zen 4, Raptor Lake, and the recently discounted 5800X3D, there's a ton of great options out there, and the CPU market never looked so vibrant. Competition is a great thing. This video was made possible by my awesome patrons. Join my Patreon for just $1 per month and get exclusive access to the Cortex Discord server, where I frequently share exclusive bits of information. If you can't contribute financially, then please give this video a like and share it, as that really helps. Thanks for watching, and until the next one.